Hi, everyone, and welcome to Drew's Reading Room. I am Drew, and as always on Drew's Reading Room, what we do here is that we provide people with the tools that they need to find clarity that makes it a little bit easier to navigate through life day to day. I just started the reading room just because I felt that there was a need for people to have somewhere to go, and there were people who just needed to hear what I had to say and could only receive it in the way that I had to say it, or they could only receive it from me. And that's very, very important to me and very, very near and dear to me. And in as much as I understand that, I also want to remind everybody, before I talk about today's session, which I'm very excited about, that as coaches and mentors, we're human beings. We have certain gifts that we bring to this experience that just really help people navigate through life. But we experience those same things. It's just that at this stage of our lives, maybe we have the tools to make that navigation through life seem much more seamless and seem effortless. But please understand that as coaches and mentors, we've done a lot of work to get to this place. So we're not perfect, we're just human beings who have done a lot of work to get to the place in our lives where we have some tools, where we have the experience, where we have the wisdom to be able to give people some help. And that's what we do. And so I really want you to connect with what it is I have to say. You don't have to connect with me at all. I really want you to connect to what it is that I have to say and have that resonate with you. So today's session is very, very close to my heart. It's something that the topic is something that I'm actually walking through right now and dealing with right now, and that is dealing with the death of a loved one. And that's very, very personal for me because my mother, my best friend, the love of my life, passed away in June. And so I'm still very much going through my own grieving process with that. And the death of my mother has always been something I absolutely feared. I was fearful of going through and navigating through the death of my mother. I've been scared of that ever since I was about 15, 16 years old, when it dawned on me that that was a distinct possibility that I was going to have to go through, the trauma and the experience of dealing with the death of my mother. So I actually started working on that really, really early on in my life because, I came into my spirituality and my spiritual experience around about 15, 16. And that's when it just really dawned on me that, if my mother were to pass away at that time, that I would not have had the tools to be able to navigate through it easily. It would have been traumatic for me. I would have fallen apart. I just wouldn't have been able to cope. And I just didn't want that for myself. And so I started to do the work really, really early on. And what that has done for me is that it's allowed me now, in these moments where that has already happened, it has allowed me to really move through my own grief with clarity, to move through my own grief, staying grounded and being present and understanding exactly what I'm experiencing moment to moment as I'm grieving, and be able to continue to do my work even in my grief. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm just immensely grateful to be able to be present in my own grief. And so as I'm thinking about that, and I've been thinking about that and being in the moment, I just thought I really wanted to, that's something I wanted to share with everybody today. So it might feel, the session might feel a little bit different today just because I'm actually going through it right now. So I think back to, when I was a teenager and how close I was to my mother and the experiences that we had together, and how afraid I was of having to go through the moment of her passing and the process of laying her to rest and grieving for her. I remember all of that very, very clearly, and I remember how afraid I was. And it was years later when I was on my own living in the UK, and I was practicing Buddhism, and as part of Tibetan Buddhist practice, there is a the work. One part of the work that you do is disconnecting from things, so that you gain an appreciation for the here and now, and you disconnect from any attachment that you have to anything in the future. And an important part of that work for me was disconnecting from the process of my mother dying. And I'm so grateful for that. It was very, very difficult work. I'm so grateful for that, because of how it's allowed me to navigate through not only the death of my mother a couple of months ago, but also the process of grieving. So what exactly did I do? What did I do to get to this place where I could stay present, through death and through grief? Well, one of the first things that I had to do was unlearn what I had learned about death. I think, in the West, we're one of the few cultures who view death in the way that we do. We do absolutely no preparation for it. It's this thing that happens, and it throws us completely off, and we're distraught, and we're sad, and we're in despair, and we don't know how to cope. But there are other cultures in the world where death is just a natural part of this process, and so they view it and they deal with it in completely different ways. And I actually went and researched, how cultures deal with death, and I was amazed by how cultures, particularly in the East, just embrace the whole process of death, and they just don't see it as this sad, heavy, saddening experience. They see it as this really beautiful experience and an opportunity for families and tribes and cultures to really come together and to celebrate this life that has transitioned. So in my research, it really helped me to understand that the way I viewed death did not have to be the way I viewed it moving forward. And I think that would be probably the very first step in re-evaluating and changing your mindset surrounding death, is to do your research. Go back and unlearn what you have learned. In the West, when we watch TV and as we witness the passing of loved ones, what we see is the weeping and the wailing and the sadness and the whole process of going through a funeral, and how sad that is and how heavy that is. And it doesn't have to be that way. That is our experience of it, but it does not have to be that way. And actually, I would encourage everybody to really take a close look at changing that mindset, because I don't think that mindset serves us as we go through the process of losing a loved one and grieving a loved one. So I think we have to unlearn everything that we've learned as a Western culture about dying and the whole process of death and grieving, to change our mindset and understand that death is actually a very, very natural process. Now, I'm not saying that the circumstances of people's death aren't traumatic. Depending on how people pass or how people transition, it can create trauma, and that's a different type of work. What I am saying is that death itself comes to everybody. It's going to visit everybody. There's not one of us that is exempt from that experience. And so with that in mind, it should be viewed as something very, very natural, not something supernatural or something that's going to come to us at some point later on, so we don't have to connect to it. But we should very much connect to it now, and that takes work, because of the way that we have been taught about how to view death. So one of the first things that I did was really do some research and look at how different cultures view death. And when I looked at that, and I was able to see that not everybody views it as this real heavy, sad thing, it allowed me to really let go of a lot of the anxiety that I had surrounding death. And that was really, really freeing. The second thing is, for me, the second part of the process for me was really about visualizing the moment, and I'm referring specifically to my mother now, visualizing over and over and over the moments of my mother's death and the process that I would go through after my mother died, and the grieving that I would experience in that moment. So it was very real for me. I had to visit that moment over and over again allow how I felt in that moment to really surface and, in a sense, grieve. Uh, and that over time, what happened was that the fear associated with that moment diminished because I revisited it so many times. And actually, it wasn't this big, ugly, scary thing anymore. I was able to really get in touch with how it felt as close as possible, because it's never going to be, exactly like the real thing. But it was close enough, and I was able to feel and experience the loss of my mother and how it felt to grieve in that moment. And what I found was, over the years, as I would practice and revisit, it was less and less traumatic for me. And that's just because I was doing the work. I was doing the research to change how I felt about death generally, and then revisiting and experiencing just mentally my mother's death over and over and over again, to ensure that I was preparing myself for that moment. And what happened was that when it actually did happen, I was much more prepared than I could ever have been had I not done the work. And I will tell you that one of the other things that happened that maybe I wasn't prepared for was, just in this year alone, I've experienced death 4 times. Had I not done the work that I had done to prepare for my mother's death, I would also not have been prepared for the loss of the other 3 entities. And so I'm really, really just incredibly grateful to have been prepared for not just the passing of my mother, because maybe what I realized just now is that even though I was focusing on preparing for my mother's death, actually I was just preparing for death, period. And so the four transitions that I've experienced in the last year were just so much easier for me to deal with. I was able to stay present. I was able to witness. I was able to process. I was able to go through the process of laying these people to rest. And then I was able to stay present as I grieved each of these entities. And that, being able to stay present, is, I think, the most important aspect of doing the work of preparing for death or dying or grief. So as I think about myself and how I feel, 2 months after the passing of my own mother, and months after the passing of the other people who passed in my life, the thing that resonates with me and the thing that I am the most grateful for is that, am I still grieving? Absolutely. I still miss the physicality of losing someone. But what's very, very different is that I'm able to stay present, and that if I wake up and I feel sad, that I know, okay, I feel sad today, and I'm able to examine that in a realistic way and not have it be shrouded by, the way that we experience death in the West, in the Western culture. So I'm able just to stay present and to really just be with myself, be with my thoughts, be with my emotions, and process them realistically, process them without it being surrounded by the whole experience and almost it's almost like it's almost like a show. It's almost like when you put on a performance. It's like I bypassed, if you like, the performance of grief that we've been taught to experience in the West, and that's just allowed me to really stay grounded, and that's the thing I'm most grateful for. So as I go through this process, what I would say to you is that the gift that I would give to you is this: make sure that you research, look into how other cultures view death, and allow that to reshape your experience of what you might expect when a loved one passes. Having done that research, you need to revisit, and this might be the most painful part, because you actually have to imagine the passing of people that you love. And do that more than once, more than twice, over and over again, and allow that to reshape. Allow that, what that allows you to do is to get in touch with how you might feel in that moment, even though it won't be exactly the same. You will have an experience emotionally as you imagine the passing of loved ones. And as you imagine how it feels, as you're doing that work, it allows you to process those emotions, and over time, having processed those emotions, it's almost like you've grieved over the course of the years that you're doing this work. So, if you're in your 50s like me, you're going to experience a lot more death as the years pass on, because your peers are at the same age as you or older. Your parents, if you haven't lost them already, are in the process of transitioning. Your grandparents, if you haven't lost them already, are definitely transitioning. So if you're my age, it's coming. If it hasn't started already, you're probably much more likely in the midst of it right now. And so it's really, really important that you understand that dealing with death and preparing for death takes work, just like everything else. You have to do the work to allow you to be present, to allow you to be free from the performance of someone's passing and the process of laying them to rest, and to allow you to continue to be yourself, to continue to navigate through life without the baggage that Western cultures place on the whole process of death and dying. So I really invite you to do this work. It's been invaluable for me, and I'm still very much going through it, but I'm just so grateful that I did the work starting decades ago to prepare myself for this process of my life. So again, I hope you find this helpful. Thank you for visiting Drew's Reading Room, this session of Drew's Reading Room again today. I invite you to subscribe. I invite you to comment. If anything that I've said touched you, please feel free to reach out. Thank you for joining today's session of the Reading Room. Hope to see you again soon, and love and blessings.